Good evening and welcome to the Smart Questions Club. I'm Dan Burton with Utah Politico Hub. This week we have decided to look at a question that Bernie Sanders posed recently about inequality in America and his campaign. We have with us a couple guests. They are better known because we know them than anything else. Kenny Pike from down in Arizona, and Ben Lussey from up in Davis County, Utah. And again,
Salt Lake now.
Oh, Salt Lake. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Ben moved. As usual, we have Kurt Bentley, my co-host. Kurt, are you still in Davis County?
I'm still in Davis County.
Kurt is still in Davis County. Okay, with that, let's turn it over to Kurt. Kurt, tell us a little bit about this Benny's question and, sorry, not Benny, Bernie's question, and why don't I just read it to you, and then you can take it from there.
All right.
Do we continue the 40-year decline of our middle class and the growing gap between the very rich and everyone else? Or do we fight for a progressive economic agenda that creates jobs, raises wages, protects the environment, and provides health care for all? Are we prepared to take on the enormous economic and political power of the billionaire class? Or do we continue to slide into economic and political oligarchy? These are the most important questions of our time. Hey, Kurt, why was this interesting to you?
Well, I was just browsing Bernie's website because, I find what I view as the dearth of viable presidential candidates on both sides of the aisle interesting, as well as a little bit discouraging. So I thought, let me surf on over to Bernie's website and check it out. And the first thing I hit when I clicked on the issues button was this question. And it just amused me more than anything else because it's such a silly question, right? I mean, it's phrased in a way to make the choice ridiculous and obvious at the same time. And in light of, kind of this thing we've got going with the Smart Questions Club and just the election itself, I thought it was interesting and amusing, and my comment was, oh well, this is a difficult choice. Do we ruin America, or do we, provide health care and liberty and justice for all? And so it's just one of those things that you probably expect to see this type of thing on a political candidate's web page, but it just goes to show the questions people are asking and the questions people are answering are silly, and I don't think really get us anywhere. So that's why it was interesting to me. That's why I posted about it.
Okay, let's introduce our guest this week from Arizona. Kenny, tell us who you are just real quick.
So I'm Kenny Pike, probably best described as a shiftless vagabond. I practice a little bit of law. I both teach and study philosophy here in Arizona. People will know who my wife is because she's actually, an important human being who contributes to society. But in the meantime, I get to play kept husband and political commentator on Facebook. So.
And one of the sharpest people I know.
Thank you.
Don't forget that.
And then from Salt Lake City, not Davis County.
Yeah.
And Lussey, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, I'm just a raving lawyer who sometimes finds time to think about politics, but more interested in history right now. But so I like to think historically about things, and that's me.
Excellent. Let's kick this off with this first question, thinking about this bigger question from Bernie. Have we had a 40-year decline of our middle class?
Well, empirically, the growth in real wages over the past 40 years has lagged the growth in overall GDP growth, and that's been true whether the economy was growing past 4% in the Reagan 80s and upwards of 4% throughout the 90s. You've had, you can't even compare the economy of 1970 and now, but real wages have only grown at 11%. So if you want to think about, well, where's the median income over the past 40 years? It's true, it has not kept growth with the rest of the economy. But then the question that arises is, well, why would that be the case, and would any of these economic policies that are currently in vogue right now among the Sanders, the Tom Piketty crowd, all those people, would they do anything to help, or would they just make things much, much worse? And you can actually look at the structural trends, or as the economists would call the secular trends, and you'll find that the low rate of real income growth has in fact actually been worldwide. It's the same story as it is in France, as it is in the US, as it is in the UK, as it is in Germany, as it is throughout most of the developed world. It's not the same in the developing world, in China and India, but that makes sense. But so then I think that answers the question that Bernie Sanders so falsely puts. Do we want to socialize everything because we don't like the way the middle class has been going over the past 40 years? But if you look at France and Germany, that's empirically denied. It's not. They've had the policies that everyone on the left says we should have, but they're experiencing the same problems. So it's not an answer.
Let's roll back a little bit. So the growth rate itself has decreased, but are we really worse off than we were 40 years ago?
Well, I mean, that's the same question that, you know, if you were a king in 18th century England, would you have a better quality of life than you would now? And the answer is, of course, you would not. Things are clearly so much better now than they were in the 1970s or the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s in terms of material growth, material prosperity, and the ease with which the average consumer can consume things that a generation ago were unheard of or unimaginable luxuries.
Kenny, what do you think?
Well, I think that what Ben is sort of picking out is something that highlights sort of the philosophical commitments that the American left has. And if you look at sort of the Rawlsian perspective on justice, it's very comparative. It's not about absolutes. It's not about how well off you are. It's about how well off you are in comparison to everybody else. Weirdly, in spite of their claims often to sort of the intellectual heritage and the left-leaning academia, the fact is that we have at least two major political philosophers in the persons of Nozick and Scanlon, who have directly addressed this problem of comparative justice versus absolute justice. And we have to think more in terms of, you know, if you have an apartment and a cell phone and lots of entertainment and plenty to eat, do you have anything to complain about if the guy down the street has a mansion and, you know, 100 acres and so on and so forth? So I agree with Ben that absolute conditions are much more interesting than comparative conditions.
The question, I guess, in my mind is, do we let things stay the way they are, or do we need to make some changes in order to increase mobility again? Is there an argument that there is a feeling out there that there is a level of inequality or unfairness between the growing amount of wealth that a few people have and the middle class or the lower classes or poor classes, or are we okay?
Yeah, so I mentioned Tim Scanlon earlier, and he has a really great essay called, see if I can remember what it's called, The Diversity of Objections to Equality. And he talks about how inequality in itself is not really a legitimate, it's not really a complaint that makes sense. We complain about inequality because of the various things that inequality might lead to, right? We're upset about inequality because, for example, wealthy people have too much control over the political process, right? Maybe you feel like there's too much money, you know, going into the political process, or maybe we feel like inequality leads to actual specific harms, right? Someone's so poor that they don't get enough to eat, or they don't get enough. But it turns out that every time we say inequality, we're really borrowing a complaint from somewhere else, and he outlines a number of objections. And this is something that I think gets just sort of wildly overlooked. When somebody says, oh, but it's not fair, it's not equal, if you ask them, but why is that bad? they usually have some other reason. They usually have some other thing that they're really actually concerned about. And I think that if we want to make, if we do think that we want to make the world a better place, right? If we have that sort of generic desire, we need to be addressing those things, not inequality per se.
What do you mean? What other things might people actually be complaining about versus just inequality? Give me an example there.
Hunger, right? There's a very straightforward issue. The problem of hunger is not that I have food and you don't. The problem of hunger is you don't have food.
Right.
It's not about equality. It's about hunger. Right? And there are lots of other things, right? Same thing, if I have political power and you don't, the problem is not that there's a difference between the power we have. The problem is you don't have political power, and if I'm a good Democrat, then I believe that everybody should have some political power. Right.
But people say,
Democrat, right?
Sorry?
Small D Democrat.
Right.
So you're welcome to be a good large D as well. Kurt, anything you want to throw in there while we're at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I find it all very interesting, and I think if you were to talk to somebody like Bernie Sanders, and you would say, this whole inequality thing, what you're really focused on is some kind of a lack or deprivation that's occurring among a certain segment of the population, not really inequality. They might respond and they say, well, yeah, but as long as we have hunger that exists in the United States, and one of the Walton kids is worth $20 billion, I can, that's why inequality is a problem, because they've got much that they've made on the backs of the hungry person. Right?
Yeah, right. They hold out the existence of wealthy people as an aberration, as the means by which the otherwise equitable distribution of wealth or income had been perverted, such that grab what the rich have so that the poor can have it. It's Robin Hood economics and sociology as a means of explaining a less than ideal outcome. And so they'll say, well, why is it that we can live in a country that has the most capital that any society has ever created, the most amount of wealth and power, material power, social power, whatever, that's ever existed, and we can still have a poverty rate, above the teens, we can still have a hunger rate above whatever? Wouldn't it be better if we could just take everything that everybody's got and cut the pie equally, and la-da-da, it's all finished, and it's just a question now of crushing the political power of the wealthy who would prevent that from happening and getting us all to the promised land. Yeah. But the Democratic Party and the left inherently relies upon the idea of a Manichaean worldview. There is evil because someone made it happen, and we can identify who that someone is, and we can punish who that someone is. And now, because of the fantastic world of the internet, we can not only identify who the big guys are who made it happen, and they all are guys, by the way, with the exception of Carly Fiorina. Not only can we identify that, but we can also so-called dox all their little minions on down the line until eventually we've established the individual identities of every member of the Republican Party and can send them hate mail and harass them, etc., because they're the problem, and they need to shut up and stop thinking how they do, and then everything fixes itself, right? I mean, that's kind of the political paradigm that we're seeing on the left. And so the question that I've got, actually, that Kurt's question raised and Bernie's quote raises, is the equality debate, the income equality debate, the economic equality debate, really the focus right now of the left, of the activist left, or is it identity politics? I mean, we all saw what happened at Netroots, right? Bernie Sanders, who's preaching economics that everyone on the left seems to love, got hooted out of existence based on that Black Lives Matter and the All Lives Matter thing. And so I don't even know that we've got our finger on the pulse of where the left is really going right now. Both. They were both hassled by it.
Bernie had as well.
Yeah. Kenny's smiling too much. I want to hear from him.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got a response.
Well, yeah.
Sorry,
so,
we had a lovely chat going about economics, and I had to get social on it. Sorry.
No, that's all right. But something that you said, though, I think is really relevant, right? Think of the pie, right? You take the pie. Let's say we put everything in a great big pot. We dice it all up, right? Give equal measure to every man, woman, and child, right, in the country. Okay, then what? What happens next? This is
end of history. That's what.
What
right.
is the impact of doing this?
Well, here's the thing. This is the criticism that Nozick raised against Rawls, right? It's that even if hypothetically we're able to reach this promised land that Ben mentioned, right? That everything is diced up and everybody has the same share.
Jobs, wages, environment, healthcare. Yeah.
Yeah. And then tomorrow, Nozick in his day used Wilt Chamberlain. He used the Wilt Chamberlain example, right? Wilt Chamberlain plays basketball. Wilt Chamberlain charges everybody $1 to watch him play basketball, and 1,000 people or 10,000 or 100,000 people, they all take $1 and give it to Wilt Chamberlain.
Because they want to do that. Because they want to watch him play.
Right. Because they want to. They chose, so you can't say it was unjust or unfair.
Right.
And he gets this money. So one day after you dice up that pie, it's going to be unequal again.
Yep.
Because the Wilt Chamberlains or the Bill Gateses or whoever of the world, they're going to start accumulating capital. So what do? You
annually reconcile via Form 1040A, right?
No, you force Wilt Chamberlain to be other than he is, so he can't have that earning capacity that the market would otherwise give him. And then you force everybody who would have liked to have watched Wilt Chamberlain play not satisfy that demand, not realize that potential, because otherwise you get an unjust outcome. So you get down to oppression. You get right down to it. I mean, you have to use brute force to prevent a transaction that otherwise people would want to have and want to do from happening. And the only way that the end result of that is stifling, right? It's just stifling.
Yeah, no, but Kenny's point is really good, because what you end up having to conclude is that, this state of equality is just a fantasy. It's not something that's not going to exist. You can create it, and then it runs away from you.
Well, and even if you wanted to, is it desirable? I don't think so.
Let me ask a question. We're getting close on time here, but let me ask a question then. Is it wrong that there are a few people that are accruing so much more wealth than the others in a level much higher than we've had in the recent past? And if so, do we need to do something about that at all? Is there something morally wrong about that?
It's an old question, right? But I don't know that it's a new question. I mean, so we think
people are turning out to hear Bernie say this. People feel like they care about this. I mean, either Kenny says they're there for something else other than that, or there really is resentment that the wealthy have so much wealth.
Eugene Debs asked the same questions in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Vanderbilt's and the Rockefellers and those.
Recent past, right? Because
I mean, this is. I mean, it seems like it's a new question, but it's not really a new question. I mean, the natural condition.
It's a new question. My question is that a problem, and should we do something about it? Should something be done about it?
Well, think historically, the natural course of human existence is extreme inequality. Take the mid-century of the mid-20th century America, the most equal time our society has ever been, right? Right after the war, when there was, in fact, rising income that matched the rising economic growth, when our Gini coefficient was the smallest it had ever been, that was a one-off. That was one generation that experienced that. One generation in one part of the world, after we destroyed Europe's industrial capacity in the worst conflict the world had ever seen, and there was no competition in the free world to match American industrial might, we had, for a brief and unsustainable period of time, 25 years max, something that many progressives want today. But how do we go about getting that again? It's just not possible. It's just not even within the... I mean, it's so unthinkably impossible that to then even ask, should we try to frame policy towards that end? You're getting so far out of the realm of what can be done that it's not even a useful debate.
So you're not worried about whether it should be done. You're more worried about whether it's even practical.
I mean, okay, so let's say we don't like the fact that that kid Zuckerberg has got billions and billions of dollars. How do we stop that from happening? You know, we prevent Facebook from coming about. Is that good? Or Google? Or Uber, which is apparently mega controversial right now.
I don't think we even have to get that far, because you asked the question, you know, is this wrong? Is this bad? I'm reasonably confident, I think, that the vast majority of people turning out to hear this speech are not hearing inequality is bad. What they're hearing is, yeah, I should have more.
Exactly.
You know, Kenny, I've read that a lot of these people that are turning out are actually college students, right? These are the ones who are much attracted, and you teach. How would the students in your classes respond to these kinds of questions? What would they say?
Well, I mean,
Good question.
I have a pretty diverse, you know, student body. I teach community college. Most of them, I think, not a large majority. I'd say probably a small majority of them will find this rhetoric initially fairly appealing, because most of them are not economically particularly well off. It turns out, though, that that's sort of what happens when you're at the very beginning of things. It's unusual for a 19 or 20-year-old kid to really have it good. And I think that's okay, because if they want to have it good, you know, there are ways that they can work to produce and to, you know, try to have it good. And a lot of them right now are saying, well, you know, the job market is bad, or, you know, I paid too much for my degree, or, you know, it's always this sort of somebody else's fault. And I think that's Bernie's central message, right? Is this is not your fault. This is somebody else's fault. Let's get them.
Yeah, it's the 15-hour minimum wage argument, right? It says anyone who works 40 hours a week at McDonald's should be able to rent an apartment and provide for a family of 3.
In San Francisco.
Yes.
Or Seattle, right? And I mean, that has a very moral appeal to it, because you say, yeah, I mean, what do the Walton kids do? You know, what does Zuckerberg do? He probably works hard, but, you know, he's not flipping burgers. But I mean, those are the types of questions that never get asked, and the assumptions that never get questioned, right? Is, you know, whether that should actually be the case, or whether people who work at McDonald's should be rooming, you know, together, you know, living in an apartment and sharing rent and expenses and things like that.
It's interesting, because the large majority of people who do make minimum wage usually live in multiple income households, and they're not full-time wage earners. They're going to school, or they're young, or they are married to someone or living with someone.
Perversely, I wonder how many children of working professionals in Seattle, where they have this new minimum wage, who live in households that make well above the median. I wonder how many of them suddenly have a whole lot more summer pocket money because of this new minimum wage.
All the prices went up 15% with it.
Well, but then how many people got priced out of the market? You know, I mean, that's the other question, and that first rung of the ladder is gone now for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. Is the American dream still possible? Can you still become a Mark Zuckerberg? Give me a 30-second answer. Then you go first.
Well, the idea of the American dream was, again, kind of this moment where it really came into play was in mid-century, where the idea was that you didn't have to go to college, you didn't have to have the cutting edge of skills, you just had to be willing to work hard, and the economy would value your labor regardless of the skills or the value you created, and you would have enough to support your family. But again, in a globalized world, which is something that can't be reduced or can't be gotten away from, this idea that, well, if you work hard, you're gonna succeed. That's not true. It never has been true. You have to work hard and you have to work well to succeed, absolutely. But you have to have the right skills to bring to the market. So this idea about the American dream, is it dead, is it alive? I think the more realistic question is, do we have policies in place that are going to help create a productive American workforce that's going to be self-reliant and capable of meeting the new 21st century?
Kurt?
Well, I think Ben brings up a good point about, what is exactly the American dream, right? Realtors will tell you the American dream is owning your own home, which always makes me chuckle. But as far as upward mobility, I think it's absolutely there. It doesn't mean you're going to get rewarded every time you work hard. It doesn't mean that there's somebody else who's not better at what you're trying to do that's going to get rewarded before you. But the ability to move up your current situation, I have seen no evidence that that's gone. And that's one of the frustrating things to me, because when you listen to people like Bernie Sanders talk, they talk as if it's out of the control. And the only people who control it are the ones with money. And I think that's probably more true than it has been, but I don't think it's the rule at all. So yeah, American dream's still there, as far as I'm concerned.
Kenny?
I'm with Kurt on questioning, what is the American dream, and what does it really mean? I think that what it has meant for most of our history is something like, can you make it on your own? Can you be self-sufficient? Can you go out there and find a place to start and do it? And the thing about living the American dream is that it takes an American sort of person, right? Or at least what passed for classically American at some point in the 20th century.
Absolutely.
And so to sort of crib that old dating advice, right? It's not about finding the right person, it's about being the right person, right? Well, maybe the same is true of the American dream. So.
I like that.
I like that. There's two things that that stuck with me when I was young. Is one, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and then two, the path to success is to rise early, to work hard, and to strike oil. And I do think there's a certain amount of luck. I do think some people are benefited by where they're born, but I do believe that you can still work hard and make something of yourself, no matter where you start from.
Isn't this a time when we should all acknowledge our privilege?
Yeah.
I'm looking at 4 white male faces here.
Well, I was once mistaken for Jewish by a dear friend, so maybe that mitigates.
All right.
Privilege.
Don't forget that it's also possible to belong to religious minorities, to come from poor backgrounds, and you can take my privilege from my cold, dead hands.
Well, thank you, everyone, for your time. I know you guys are busy people, but I think your thoughts are interesting. I hope someone else out there does, and I hope we've created some interesting stuff for you to think about. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us for next time. We try to think about and ask the smart questions. Thanks, and have a great night.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.